You have to separate cash and PSR when you look at whether the Glazers and Ineos should be putting more money into the club, and it's quite possible that from a cash perspective that the Glazers and Ineos will ultimately be required to do that. Things are definitely not good. There's no question about that. As we sit here today, people are literally losing their jobs at the club in the second or third tranche of redundancy. So things are difficult. I think the importance of Champions League and Europe for United would be around the accelerant of the recovery. So what you're going to find is, without having any Europe, there is going to be a hit of between 40 and probably 100 million pounds to the top line. Now that will be mitigated further down by cost savings and wage reductions and things of that nature, but the impact will be significant from not having any Europe at all, and therefore losing between 5 and 7 home games, as well as the prize money that you get from Europe. And then on top of that, there's the knock-on effects for how it affects the value pillar, as it's known, which is the replacement really for that coefficient that teams used to have within the UEFA revenue model. I think you'll see a more cautious approach. I don't think it was a shock that, in terms of the spending, Amorim said that he was going to hold effectively 2 budgets, and that's what they've been working to. I think they've already decided that Kuna from Wolves will be the first purchase, and I think he was a player that was in both scenarios on the planning, but I would expect that they will cut their spending unless they decide that the better way to approach it is to start making more drastic player sales. So, for example, they've already talked about Garnacho being possibly sold, and as a homegrown player, or a player with virtually no net book value, you would expect them to make a substantial profit of, let's say, £40 million and maybe a little bit more in selling him. And obviously, if you can generate £40 million of player trading profit, that's going to have a big impact on how United can trade this summer. And that's against the backdrop, really, if you look at the last 5 years, where they've done only about £100 million of player trading profit. So you can see the impact that selling a Rashford and a Garnacho and potentially getting moving on players like Anthony and Sancho, you can see the impact that that might also have on the spending to compensate for the loss of European football. Well, in total, it's over £1 billion. So you've got the transfer debt of around about 390 million broadly, but they're also owed about 90 million from other clubs. So you've got about a net of about 300 there. And about half of it is due next summer. Clearly, they'll almost certainly sell some players as well as buying new players. So it will move over time. And those numbers are the last that we had as at 31st December 2024, which is their half year. We are going to get, in the next few weeks, the position at the end of March. So we'll have a bit more detail there. Then on top of that, you've got the financial debt, and the financial debt is split into 2 facilities. One is what they call a revolving facility, which is kind of their working capital facility that goes up and down through the year. That's about £200 million. And then on top of that, they have about £500 million. These are broad brush numbers, but about £500 million of long-term debt on top of that. Now, they've actually had a benefit over the last few months from the move of the dollar to the pound. So that will actually reduce. They'll have this almost one-off reduction when it converts back into pounds. But those numbers are broad brush as to where they were as of 31st of December. I think this summer they are probably not at risk for a couple of reasons. One, you would see them frantically trying to sell players before June if that was the case. So they do have time in which they can handle any particular issue. And then on top of that, Chelsea have shown the way in terms of the sale of other assets, be it non-football assets like a hotel. Manchester United don't have that same sort of asset, so it's less likely to be that kind of sale. But certainly the women's team, which of course we know was the other big Chelsea disposal to create PSL profits. That is something that in a worst case scenario, Manchester United could look to. And you would think, given the scale of the club, that likewise that would be worth in the region of £200 million in the way that Chelsea's women's team was worth £200 million. And now that Chelsea have had the third-party validation of an investor from the outside, it's going to make valuations of women's teams, certainly of the biggest clubs, much easier to establish with the Premier League and to get the fair market value approval that's required by the Premier League's rules. Yeah, you have to separate cash and PSR when you look at whether the Glazers and Ineos should be putting more money into the club. And it's quite possible that from a cash perspective, that the Glazers and Ineos will ultimately be required to do that. Now, we know that when the investment was made by Ineos over 2 tranches, they have put in $300 million, and that is necessary to strengthen the balance sheet of the club, given the high level of indebtedness that it has, and given the cash burn that they're currently experiencing with the investment that's been made into the first team and the underperformance by the club from a financial perspective. And it's quite possible that going forward, if they continue to fail to qualify for European football, then there will need to be additional funds put in. But what we're going to have to see over the next few months is how's the club cut its cloth versus how it's operating on the field. So we know, for example, that it's going to have been something like 10 places lower than its budget from a revenue perspective for this season. So it's finished 15th. The club's finished 15th. It will have expected, I suggest, it would have budgeted for a minimum finish of 5th. So it's lost 10 places. That's something like £30 million of cash that it would have been expecting to come in over the next couple of months from the prize money, from the merit award of the Premier League, that it now doesn't have. On top of that, they failed to win the Europa League final. So that is another 7 million that they would have hoped, 7 million euros, I think it is, that they would have hoped to have come in. And then on the other side, they'd have compensated by going to Malaysia and Hong Kong for a post-season friendly. So that will have mitigated some of that damage from a cash perspective. But clearly they're going to be down on where they expected to be from a cash perspective for the current season. So the question will then be, after all of the redundancies that have been made and the player trading that's inevitable over the summer, where does it land in terms of the cash burn of the club through next season? And at the moment, we don't have enough information and we don't know all of the signings and all of the sales that have been made. And clearly, when you're a football club, there's a very, very big impact that comes from selling footballers. So we know, for example, that if they were to manage to sell Rashford, who's probably on the best part of £20 million a year of cost when you include national insurance, if you can deal with the sale of Casemiro, again, another player who's probably on £20 million a year total package, these numbers have a very material impact on the cash burn of the club going into the next season. So we'll just have to see how it pans out, almost blow by blow, over the summer and into next season, to know how much money is going to be required in cash terms from the Glazers and Ineos versus being able to raise that from other sources such as player sales. Yes, it will be a challenge to move on the more expensive footballers. We know already that Aston Villa, having failed to qualify for the Champions League, it would not be a surprise, for example, if they passed on the opportunity to bid for Rashford, a deal that's going to cost somebody in the region of £100 million over the term of his contract. You've got a £40 million fee and you've got at least a 3-year contract for the player. You've probably got a 4-year contract. And so the likelihood is that Rashford isn't going to want to take a reduction in his wages from currently, let's say, £20 million per annum. And if he doesn't, and he wants a 4-year contract at 20 plus the £40 million transfer fee plus the agent fee of another 10%, you can see how it adds up very quickly. That can be a £120 million transaction. And then you go, okay, well, let's say Aston Villa aren't the home for Marcus Rashford. Who is? Newcastle are possible in terms of being able to pay that kind of money. But again, he would go into Newcastle being one of their most expensive players. Is that a deal where they want to spend a very substantial portion of their budget? We'll have to see. But beyond these sorts of teams, there are very few options for the most expensive players that Manchester United have. That applies also to Casemiro. Really, the reality of Casemiro is that unless he goes to Saudi Arabia, the chances are Manchester United will have to subsidise probably at least 50% of his salary, and that's even after giving him a free transfer. So these are the realities. I do think these are very difficult situations for Manchester United, but they're not unique to United. City will have similar issues, for example, with Jack Grealish, a player of similar value to Rashford, and again, somebody who's on probably £20 million a year. The market for these players in 2025, outside of the Premier League and outside of 2 or 3 clubs around Europe, and that's all it is very, very small. So that is the challenge that all major clubs have when they have a signing or an expensive player that they want to remove from the squad. Well, it is possible. I mean, in terms of getting money into the club, Manchester United have a complexity in that they're owned effectively by 3 blocks. You have the Ineos block, let's say 28%. You've got the Glazer block, a little bit more. And then you've got the public shareholders. And for any party to put money into the club, they would have to crystallise a certain value in the amount that's put in, the pounds per share. So we know, for example, that Ineos, when they came in last time, they put money in at $33, I think, from memory. And the share price is currently trading at a substantial discount to that, around about half. So you have a situation where there's a question mark as to what value any new money is put in, if it's put in by way of new shares. So then you say, well, can we raise additional debt to go on top of the existing debt that we've got? It's not impossible, but the issue that Manchester United have is that they already need to refinance a large bulk of the debt because it comes due in 2027. That in itself, again, is not a major issue because there will be a market for refinancing Manchester United's debt. But of course, the question will be, what's the cost of that debt? And can they raise even more on top of the principal amount that they've got? We don't know what the answer to that question is, but it would seem to be challenging to put more debt onto Manchester United, especially given that they have very significant capex required for the new stadium. And also very substantial capex even for the existing stadium, because we know that that new stadium is not going to be ready for many years if it does progress. And so they will have to spend money on old Old Trafford whilst they are in the process of formulating the plan and actually building new Old Trafford. So I would say it's unlikely that United would be looking for additional debt. I think it's more likely that they'll have to find a way in which either Ineos or the Glazers or both, and I would say probably most likely Ineos, would put new equity in there and thereby dilute the rest of the shareholders. So Ineos would go up from 28%. Glazers and the rest of the shareholders would come down, and that's how United would get more cash into the business if they needed to. But I think the most likely initial source of cash is going to be from trying to sell footballers. Well, the value of the club will diminish as it becomes less of a club that's guaranteed European football, especially because European football is now so lucrative, particularly in the Champions League. If you are a club who is only qualifying for the Champions League perhaps one in every 2 seasons as opposed to every season, then clearly the value of the property, being the football club, is going to reduce from a commercial perspective. So yes, there will be an impact on value. I wouldn't look too closely at the listed valuation, because the listed valuation really doesn't speak to the full valuation of the club and the company. There's a huge amount of debt, for example, so the listed stock price is only the value of the equity part, not the value of the whole, not the enterprise value, but the equity value. So that's only one element. And then on top of that, it's not a very heavily traded stock, because in terms of the amount of the share capital that is available for investors to trade on a day-to-day basis, it's only a very small element of the 100%, because of course Ineos are not trading any shares, nor are the Glazers. So you have a situation where only a very small part of Manchester United and only a certain type of share is trading on a day-to-day basis on the New York Stock Exchange. So I wouldn't get too focused on the share price itself. The share price in any event has barely moved since the Glazers took over, and it bore no relation to the price that was paid by Ineos when they put their money in over the last 18 months. So I would say don't focus on that, but clearly there's going to be an issue with the valuation of Manchester United is going to be impacted by disappointing and continued disappointing performance on the pitch, and also other aspects such as the need to build a stadium, which may cost in excess of £2 billion. All of these things will go into the mix of what Manchester United is worth. No, I wouldn't agree with that analysis, because they remain one of the most profitable clubs, albeit at a certain level of the profit and loss account. They do continue to have one of the best brands and one of the most valuable brands in the global game, and probably in global sport. On top of that, they have investors, as we've touched on, in Ineos and the Glazers, who, if push comes to shove, are in a position where they can put their hand in their pocket. So they don't have, despite what Sir Jim Ratcliffe said to various outlets just 2 or 3 months ago, I don't believe they have the liquidity issue that has been described, because I do think that they've got options. No, I think Manchester United is going obviously through a very difficult phase, but I don't think that the future of the club is in any way in doubt. And I think it remains one of the most powerful brands in world sport. You can't be too cheerful if you're a Manchester United fan when the team has finished in its lowest position ever in the Premier League. Is definitely going to have one of its most disappointing seasons financially. So things are definitely not good. I mean, there's no question about that. As we sit here today, people are literally losing their jobs at the club in the second or third tranche of redundancy. So things are difficult, and it's not clear that United will recover next season. Certainly, it would be one of the most exceptional recoveries if they were to get back into the Champions League next season. So I think it's going to be a journey. But I think those that have looked carefully at the numbers will understand that they retain many key features that you would want in a top sporting brand, and that is recognised by their commercial partners, and it's still recognised by players. They've had straight away they've managed to sign Matheus Cunha, who does not seem to have been put off by the distress at the club, and he will sign. And players are not all flooding for the exits. There are offers that we know about from Saudi Arabia for some of their better players, such as Bruno, and it doesn't seem to be that he's rushing to go. So I think you have to look at it in a balanced way. The club has troubles, but right now it can still recover well over the next few years.